Hello there, I'm Dr. Alexandra Karl. I'm the curator of this exhibition, Wildfires in Utah Art, Homes, and Lands. This is an exhibition featuring 18 artists from Utah that are exhibited here at the Bountiful Davis Art Center in Bountiful. The exhibition opened on the 9th of January and it's open until the 20th of February. I'm here on a Sunday when things are closed. That enables me to speak to you without a mask so that hopefully I'm a little bit more understandable than when I do have my mask on. I first want to acknowledge the unceded lands that we're standing on that belong to the Eastern Shoshone and Goshute Indians. And I think that acknowledgement is not just an arbitrary nod to land rights, but I think in this case, in the context of wildfires, it's an important distinction because the Indigenous people here had such different and more productive approaches to really harnessing wildfires and using them in a sort of preventative way, as opposed to the ways that wildfires have evolved from settler cultures. So I think that's a really important distinction. I'm here otherwise to just lead a curator's tour through the exhibition. Like I said, there are 18 wonderful artists. All of the works are for sale except for a couple that have already sold. They would make wonderful additions to your collection. So why don't we start here with some works by Sandra Brunvand, who's from the University of Utah. There are 5 works here by her that are basically drawings that are made with Sumi ink. They're from her headline series where she worked with real headlines taken from the Salt Lake Tribune. And these particular headlines, they're kind of typed inside the drawings that she's doing here, all reference climate change. And they kind of function as a, for me, I wanted to include these works because I think they set a sort of a mood for this exhibition, which references all the warnings we've been given about climate change. There are these statements. Utah's second largest wildfire keeps burning in the Uinta for weeks. In Utah's mountains and deserts, the Columbia spotted frogs are sentinels of climate change. The Vatican says climate change efforts go forward without the U.S., and so on and so forth. They're really quite explicit in terms of a dialogue that's already started that where the U.S. has not particularly been the leader in making the changes that are necessary. So I thought these were an important place to start for the exhibition. If we continue through here, we find works, first of all, by Maureen O'Hara Ure, who's also at the University of Utah. She's a painter in mixed media, and she has a lot of antediluvial imagery. And there are 2 works, actually. There's this larger panel and this smaller work here. And they both kind of show this our world that's kind of on fire, from thousands and if not millions of years ago. And I thought that was also like a really important element to think about the world before the Anthropocene, before people even started messing around and messing around with the environment. And that work is juxtaposed here by these desks that are made by Alison Neville, which document the history of atomic testing in the West. They are really quite extraordinary. She's crafted a little ceramic mushroom each place that there was an atomic bomb dropped, either in Nevada or in the Pacific Islands. And I think that was also important to me to sort of reference these various histories, more so Alison Neville, in terms of there being a history of people trashing the West, people torching it, of there being this history of atomic testing. Maybe that sort of plays into this kind of dismissive role that people have with the land here, and with, oh, everything's going to be all right. There's nobody really living there. Who cares about whether we just lose a few acres here and there? That's part of the mentality, I think, that plays into the situation that we find ourselves in now. This area has works by two artists. Here are three canvases from a painting professor at BYU called Peter Everett, who works very abstractly. But these three works have very flammable iconography. I think they're really incredibly powerful, in terms of sort of having these areas that are just kind of sparking and then giving off all kinds of like almost contaminating the air and producing these incredible clouds. They're so ominous. This one in particular, this is this sort of I don't know what to think of it. Is it like a dirt cloud or something that's the particulates are somehow incredibly suffocating, really. And I found that very, very. This is really powerful iconography here as well. Like you have this sort of area that's catching a light, and then just some kind of entity that's floating off, and really, really, I don't know. I find this kind of troubling iconography. The more that I look at it, I feel like I'm going to have a nightmare about it or something. It's very powerful stuff. These are three works by a BYU graduate called Anastasha Larsen. She has a lot of works, ceramic works throughout the exhibition. And she had a really, I guess you could say, an obsession with wildfires, really interested in them as a catalyst for change, for sort of, actually for sort of creating a more positive, because as we heard from Dr. Abbott yesterday, wildfires can have tremendously positive outcomes. It's just that the frequency of them now and the intensity of them is really too much for many ecosystems to handle. But many of Anastasha's works are sort of embrace that positivity of the fire as something that almost like the phoenix, you move through and then something positive comes out of it. In this next section, we have works by four artists. This is a work by Salt Lake artist Andrea Jensen. It's called Wildfires. I saw this in a show that she had at Knox Gallery, and I thought it would be a good fit for here. I think it's marvelous. Again, you get this sense of particulates entering the atmosphere. There's all kinds of different perspectives that she's layering. Obviously, really far distant contours of a forest here, and yet here almost like a panel of wood, and different kinds of topographies of the landscape that are being layered. It's a really marvelous work. Lots of nice little details. Just this little pink here, and the line of yellow there. It's a really fabulous work. Unfortunately, it's not for sale. But anyways, this is a work by another Utah artist called Nancy Andruk Olson. This is obviously more of a totally different take on fire in terms of its almost a metaphoric reading its capacity to be a metaphor for romantic love or consumption. Almost creativity often is associated with something that's consumed and burned. And then you have like the hands of God coming down and clasping each other. I think it's a really, really, really powerful image that was created for the exhibition itself. Some of the works were, had been completed several years ago, and there are also works that were made specifically for the exhibition. Here's another one of Anastasha's tile pieces. She has several works, particularly at the entrance, that are made from ceramic tile. I think the combination of having a wildfire burning in the landscape that goes into the kiln, which is sort of a kind of contained inferno, is a really powerful choice. So I think these are really fabulous. Here we have two drawings by John Ericksen, who also teaches at the U, and they also have this incredible intensity. One of them is called Escape the Burn, and the other one is called Fleeing Fire. And these kind of channel that sense of panic and franticness, if that's a word, when you have to just throw everything you own, including the dog, into the back of your car and just drive as fast as you can, not knowing where you're going to land. It's a really intense, these are two really intense scenes that I think have, manifested very successfully. Okay, if we move further into this next section, there is a drawing here by a instructor from BYU called Linn. Ron has done a number of drawings, and there are also works by him at the front in the entrance to the exhibition. He has been interested in particular in this thing that happened in Oregon in the 1950s and 60s called the Tillamook Burn, where hundreds of thousands of acres were consumed or lost, really for kind of arbitrary reasons. I think it was a car that sparked or some really kind of simple and arbitrary event sparked the loss of hundreds of thousands of acres. And so he has visited the forests there that are still very much damaged, that have not recovered or regrown. And he became really interested in the memorial plaques that were erected in particular areas to memorialize these unfathomably large, massive, devastating events, and the discrepancy between that huge devastation and this horribly inadequate memorial that's erected. I think it's a really, really stunning drawing, and this is one of the works that he made specifically for the exhibition. We have also three works by Frank McEntire, who's a well-known artist in the community here. This is called Lamentation. So Frank has traditionally worked with a lot of works that memorialize firefighters or EMTs or people who are caught up in these horrible, all kinds of events, really. And so here's such as 9/11. And he's made a lot of memorials for the victims of 9/11. And this was from a show that he had again at Knox Gallery where he incorporated a lot of equipment from the firefighting community that I thought would fit very well into the show. And so we have here these overalls. I think it's called a winch, a sort of a vintage winch, and this oxygen tank on a pedestal. And they're incredibly, I think there's a kind of a reverence for these objects. The fact that I find when I look at this, I end up focusing on the part that goes into the person's mouth. And I really think about, so this work is called Breathe. And I really think about the fact that this battered, ancient piece of equipment will actually keep somebody alive as they walk through fire, quite literally. The coveralls again have that effect, but the fact that they're called lamentation gives it a really religious significance, almost as we think of like traditional altar paintings are called lamentation, where Mary is mourning the death of her son, who's been crucified. And obviously there's a sort of play on that kind of iconography. So this is some really wonderful work by Frank that I'm really happy to include. Here, another work by Maureen O'Hara Ure, Spook. Some kind of futuristic character walking through this dangerous, overheated landscape. I looked at this and I wondered, is this what life is going to be like? Will we have to put on? Will the American West get so overheated? Will the droughts be so prolonged that we're going to have to go outside wearing outfits like that? It's sort of an absurdist. It's an absurdist costume, almost like a clown, but it's also spooky as well. This is a wonderful piece by the only participant in the show. This is a wonderful piece by the only participant in the show who is an active firefighter, Kylie Milward. It works as a firefighter, and as a result, she made this fantastic drawing. It's called Nutritious Meals Provided for a Forestry Technician. I think it's one of the most politically charged pieces, maybe other than Sandra Brunvand's headline series. We've got basically, this artist has drawn all of the food packages that are provided for forestry technicians. I would call them wildfire fighters, but technically they've been given this label, and she explains underneath, forestry technician is an occupational title used by the federal government to refer to who everyone else recognizes as a wildland firefighter. This allows the government agencies to exploit workers and deny them basic benefits, stability, and fair wages, while knowing forestry technicians have one of the most demanding and hazardous jobs in the world. Such a powerful statement. And I just want to point out that the amount that this drawing is selling for is the equivalent to 14 days of per diem wages for forestry technicians. So really quite a powerful piece. And then obviously, like all of the food, when you look closer at it, it's super, what's the word, overproduced. It's packaged in all kinds of plastic and styrofoam that, plays into this issue of climate change and pollution and I find it a very unsettling and ultimately political piece. We come to this section, which has work by a number of artists. I've sort of thought of this section as the graveyard section. This is really the most devastating area for me, where you see a lot of homes that have been ravaged. We start with, these are two pieces by a familiar woman in the Salt Lake art scene, Jean Arnold, who for I want to say a couple of decades really made a career of painting in a very, very different style. I hope she doesn't mind saying that she got to a point where she could not live in Salt Lake anymore because the air quality was so bad, and she moved this summer to Idaho in the hopes of finding a more stable and environmentally stable situation. And as soon as she got there, the town right next to where she was living burned to the ground. So she went there and visited it. It's called Malden. Both of these works, this is Malden with remnants and Malden after the fire. And she has completely flipped over her way of working and her palettes, the colors that she's choosing. And these are just incredibly powerful contributions to this exhibition. I'm really so honored to have them in the show. Here we have two works by Lenka Konopasek that just show, how devastating these kinds of fires can be. They're really these homes that we can all identify with. They could be our homes, could be my home, your home, are just completely getting ravaged and destroyed rather intensively. And so I think these are also strong statements about how people are losing property, losing the places where they're raising their families and such. Probably as a pinnacle to this area, we have two photos and text by Andy Pitcher Davis, who is the sole person in the exhibition that actually lost her property this summer. She is standing in what used to be in the middle of what used to be her family cabin. Here are some cups that used to belong to her mother, and she had to sort of literally dig them out of the ashes of this what has become a graveyard essentially. This was obviously a super traumatic experience for her and everybody involved. And she also knew people that were very close to her that perished nearby. And she wrote this really, really powerful text about the inadequacy, the effrontery of having a funeral by Zoom, of how different and inadequate it is to mourn people you love without actually attending a funeral, but having to do it in the sort of superficiality of a laptop screen. So this is, I think, the text is really extremely powerful, beautifully written, powerfully written. It's a very strong piece here. The last work of sculpture in this area is by a Utah artist who now lives in Florida called Cara Despain. This work is called It Doesn't Look Like Paradise Anymore. And this is a work that resulted from her visiting Paradise, California, which was a town in California that burned just like Malden, just like Andy Pitcher's house. All of these places have actually burned to the ground. They've been razed, they've been flattened. They no longer exist. So these are not sort of fictional scenarios that we're talking about. We're talking about real neighborhoods and communities that have been destroyed because of this situation that we're dealing with. So Cara was visited this town Paradise and a couple of years ago, and this resulted in two main branches of work. For her, she is still doing a series of charcoal drawings using burnt charcoal that she found at the actual site. And she also made this extraordinary sculpture, which is a vinyl fence that has been torched. It's twisting like a suffering animal, like an animal in anguish. I think it's just absolutely remarkable. It's such a strong piece. So like I said, this is, for me at least, the graveyard area of the exhibition. And I kind of feel like to some extent these themes that I have kind of put together in clusters in each section are to some extent paralleled in the little phrases that are authored by Terry Tempest Williams from her essay, A Burning Testament. You can find those above the works on the walls over there. And they also are very unambiguous in terms of the intensity of her message. So there are just a couple more pieces over here to look at. We have here a photo collage by a writer from UVU called Scott Abbott, who's a professor in the Integrated Studies and Humanities department, and he lives up in an area that was evacuated because of a fire that's taking place. You can see how it's growing and billowing. It started with a little spark, and he documented this beautifully and wrote about it in a story called Fire on the Mountain, and then went around making photographs of the experience. And I think this one little footprint of a deer, trying to, you sort of imagine this creature trying to find its way through this new environment that it's not familiar with. I just find really kind of heartbreaking. I encourage you to look up the story. It's called Fire on the Mountain, which describes his experience of trying to wrap his head around being evacuated from his home. Two works here by Utah artists capture more burnt out, devastated wildlands. Here's a painting by Connie Borup, which was actually painted after the Yellowstone fire. And you can see this, she's, typically really focuses on these very intimate, closed-in natural settings. You could call her a landscape painter, but there's something very sort of intense and close about her works. And here, it's really a sort of a dark, what was once maybe a sort of flourishing and verdant, if that's the right word, grove has been completely burnt through, just filled with carbon and soot, and just still and quiet and dead. Same thing here with Hadley Rampton. This is one of the works that sold. It's such a lovely piece, but again, this sort of area that has been completely burnt out and void of any kind of life. We can move here through one of the only painting by Anastasha Larsen is this work called The Way of Holiness. She's kind of done a triptych where she's really done 3 moments in time that starts with a very healthy growing meadow that eventually has kind of a wildfire on the horizon, and then everything burnt out and ashy. So sort of obviously some kind of cycle happening here. I think maybe that's where I'll wrap things up and bring things to a close. I encourage you to come down and see the works for yourself and form your own opinions. I hope these works prompt you to think more deeply about the wildfires, or at least to think about how artists are thinking about wildfires in Utah. You can also, I want to encourage you to see there's going to be a lecture by Dr. Ben Abbott on the gallery website, and I think also on YouTube, which gives a scientific approach to this subject. We just filmed that yesterday, and it was just so informative and interesting to hear how a professional ecologist thinks about wildfires. Otherwise, I just finally want to remind you that the works are for sale, and they would make a great addition to your collections. And so, and also that you can call the front, if you're uncomfortable coming down here in person, you can call the front desk. They're really so helpful to tell you times that where you can basically have the gallery to yourself, or to just share it with one or two other people. It's the social distancing here is very easy. You will be required to wear a mask, but the front desk is very accommodating for people with those concerns. Okay, thank you, and have a great day.